Good morning, my friends. Welcome. Happy Father's Day. Good to be with you. Good to be in the space. We're going to be continuing on with this idea of cultivating the essentials of the spiritual path. What we've been working on, I think, for the longest time now is really drilling down on these fundamental truths that help us navigate the inner space of spiritual awakening. And so we've talked about things like finding the ground of our being, which is this deeper identity, this deeper name or presence of God. And this identity is very much like the oceanic presence, and all manifestation is like a wave or multiple waves on this ocean of divine being. And so what we've recognized then is we cannot be confused by appearances, by the forms and the wave formations, that we actually have to first seek the ground, find the one, and then we can understand the many. If we're lost in the illusion of the many and forget the one, we are in a state of chaos, and we are not in a way finding peace, no matter how many forms we think we have around us that seem to meet our needs or fulfill our, briefest of expectations and desires. Eventually, this impermanence of the wave aspect of reality or the appearance aspect of reality will change. Everything is always changing at the appearance level. And so there's never any stability or peace if we are lost in the appearances. And so we have to find the fundamental ground or the one self that is appearing as the many. And in finding the one, you can then understand the many as the one. There is peace, right? As Jesus says in A Course in Miracles, when you lose the fundamental authority and you think you're the author of your life as this ego appearance, then the peace of God is seen as pieces or fragments, and you can never find peace in pieces. And so this is where we bring ourselves now to the present message of this morning. I think the next step along this journey is to understand that the one, this one self, the Atman, the Christ consciousness, the Buddha nature, whatever name you want to give this deeper essence, it's a potential. It's to be actualized through our human experience. And so our physical incarnation is the alchemical furnace that allows this new birth, this higher identity to emerge in our awareness. We've looked at this idea of Dvija, twice born, born again. These ideas are, again, a fundamental part of shifting from appearance to reality. And so this is actualizing the potential. And the way that we do this, and the way we're going to look at it this morning, is that we cultivate virtue. And we ignore or weaken vice. So virtue and vice are these elements or aspects within human consciousness that will either accelerate our awakening, virtue, or they will interrupt and derail our awakening, vice. And so every choice making is involved with choosing between virtue and vice. Right? This puts us right back in that primordial garden where the original couple is said to have made the choice between the tree of life and the tree of duality. And this tree of duality was really the instigator of all choice, and it created a fragmentation and an alienation from the Creator's voice. So what was once experienced as love was now experienced as fear. And so we hid ourselves, and what was once an actualized experience of being in union with God now became a potential. And so here we are at this moment of choice again, and this is the beauty of understanding how time and eternity are always occurring simultaneously. And so there's a part of us that seems to be in time, right, this body identity. And there's a part of us that is always in eternity, and that's the choice maker. And so the choice maker is choosing between the eternal identity or the temporary ego identity. And so each moment we are back in the primordial garden, choosing between life or duality. And so this is something that we're going to play with today. We're going to be looking at it through the lens of the Mahayana Buddhist teachings of Shantideva, the way of the Bodhisattva. We're going to be looking at it through the teachings of Lord Sri Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita and the New Testament, one of the letters of St. Paul. Okay? So let's begin first by just simply being with the breath and slowing down and coming into a clear state. And so we recognize the opportunity of gathering here together in sacred space, that we can make this transition from the outer into the inner, from the profane into the holy, and to discover something that has been hidden within us, this higher potential, this divine grace that is at the center and source of our being. And so we set our collective intention to aspire to this awakening of the bodhicitta, the Holy Spirit, of this aspiration for enlightenment, for union with the divine. And in order to do this, we set aside all of the little and the petty things, the distractions, the confusions and complexities, and we turn our full attention to this commitment to our true nature and to awakening what is truly precious and enduring within our life. And in the process of coming to this place within ourselves, it is the wish-fulfilling gem that gives joy and life to all beings, because then we recognize that this one self is the self in all. And so it is. So this is a quote from Shantideva. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. Again, all the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. Now, this might feel like a bummer of a thing where you're like, you're not supposed to have any joy in the spirit, in the spiritual path, but this is not what he's saying. He's saying basically all selfish-oriented attitudes cut you off from the true self, from the totality and the one that you truly are. All virtuous, loving, wholesome ideas unite you with others, with the one self in all. And by doing that, you'll find that this brings you the joy that you've been seeking for. So what we're really distilling here is the definition of virtue and vice. Virtue is acting for the benefit of the whole, and vice is acting for the benefit of one's ego self, this isolated self. We think, and our culture, promotes this idea of get what's yours, take what you want, achieve for yourself alone. This desire to receive for the self alone actually sows the seeds of pain in your life. You'll never find what you think you'll find when you're pursuing lust and greed. It never amounts to arriving at a state of satiation and contentment. And so cultivating virtue in the beginning stages especially might feel like you're losing something because you're denying the baser instincts of yourself, this ego drive to satisfy itself through acquisition and lust. And this will be a little bit of a war for a little while. But in the end, this begins to actually set up a state of mind where you no longer feel a slave to the lower propensities. So this is the spiritual path, whether you're looking at it through Taoism, Buddhism, Sufism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. This is where we have to undergo the jihad, this inner struggle, this wrestling with oneself in order to not fall prey to the lower drives, and at the same time, cultivate virtue, right? Now, what makes this bearable, at least in my experience, is once you make the choice, you're no longer alone. Something happens, you get a touch from above, right? This is in the Shiva traditions, it's called Shaktipat. You get this divine touch, you get an influx of force or Holy Spirit that actually awakens within you this inner desire to want to know who you really are. See, the vices that cater to the ego instinct are driving you more and more into illusion. They deny your true reality, and they give you temporary pleasure. But when you are done with the pleasure, they are, as Krishna will say in the Gita, wombs of pain. You're eventually coming to realize that they weren't what they promised, and now there's more complexity and more trouble and more sorrow and more desire. And then if you keep pursuing that, things become even more twisted and perverted and darker, right? So you're never getting what you want when you follow the ego drive. But more importantly, it takes us away from who we truly are. And so the virtue brings us closer and closer to this awakening of the divine self. And that begins to bring us this sense of recognition that what I once thought was pleasure now is clearly pain. And what I once thought was not even on my radar to want has become the only thing I want to live for. Like that's the major shift within the consciousness. And like I said, it usually comes from a touch from above, right? So let's look a little bit at Shantideva. So this is the book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. Many of you probably know of this book. The Bodhisattva it's a technical term within Mahayana Buddhism, and it basically means someone who has totally committed to the path of waking up and recognizing his or her Buddha nature. And so the Bodhi part of the word is enlightened, and Sattva is being. So you're an enlightening being. And the mark of a Bodhisattva, as we see in Shantideva's teaching, is that they don't live for the self alone. They recognize that the one self is in all beings. And so as I serve others, it brings me joy. And, the Dalai Lama actually said something very insightful. The Bodhisattva is the most selfish person because the Bodhisattva recognizes that joy and satisfaction comes from serving others. And so by serving others, by loving others, by helping others, by wanting the best for others, by being compassionate and kind to others, you get what you want. Things show up in your life because we're in a feedback loop. And whatever you're giving to the picture of the world that you see, you're going to receive it. Everything that's given is received. Everything that is sown is reaped. You can't escape this fundamental law of mind. What you project comes back to you. And it usually comes back to you in stronger currents. And so this is the way that we begin to understand the science of waking up. That the more you give love and kindness to the world, the more you practice virtue, the more you look to serve others, all of your needs are taken care of. So that's why he says, those who circle in samsara. Now, samsara is when we are in this place of not knowing ourselves. It's being in this state of wandering, right? Being lost in appearances, being identified as a separate self. So those who are in the circle of samsara, mixing powerful downfalls with the power of awakening mind, or bodhicitta, back and forth, will long be hindered from the bodhisattva grounds. That's basically to say, you have to commit at some point. You have to commit to waking up. If you don't commit to waking up, it's like you're trying to go in two directions at the same time. You're trying to stay in the illusion of the ego self and find joy that can only come from your higher truth. And as long as we waver back and forth, it's like what Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas. You can't ride two horses going in opposite directions. You have to choose one. And we can be in this limbo of choice for a long time, right? And again, in A Course in Miracles, he says that this limbo of choice eventually gets, cleared up because the pain threshold is reached. We get to a point in our life where we're in such breakdown or such confusion or, wanting the truth so desperately that we no longer want to stay in this internal conflict. We make the commitment, we make the choice. So then he talks about how anger, lust, these enemies of mine are limbless and devoid of faculties. They have no bravery, no cleverness. How then have they reduced me to such slavery? They dwell within my mind and at their pleasure injure me. All this I suffer meekly, unresenting. Thus my abject patience, all displaced. So he gets to the point of the matter, really, and that is, as St. Paul will say, we don't wrestle with flesh and blood. Our problem isn't with people. Our problem isn't with governments and things out in the world. Our problem is within ourselves, our own vices, our anger, our lust, our impatience, our hatred. Right? This is where we have to look to find the enemy within. And this is where we go into this cultivating of virtue so that these enemies within become no longer the dominant force within our life. O my enemy, afflictive passion, endless and beginningless companion, no other enemy indeed is able to endure so long. All other foes that I appease and wait upon will show me favors, give me every aid, but should I seek my dark defiled emotions, they will only harm me, draw me down to grief. If thus my ancient and unceasing foes, the wellspring only of my growing pain, can lodge so safe within my heart, how can I live so blithe and fearless in this wheel of life? And so he says, I will not leave the fight until before my eyes these enemies of mine are all destroyed. For if aroused to fury by the merest slight, incapable of sleep until the scores are settled. Okay, so it's pretty intense language here from Shantideva. This is actually the foundational text for Tibetan Buddhists. This is what they train in from when they're little kids. All of the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism kind of revolve around Shantideva's way of the Bodhisattva. And it's basically what you see in the life of Jesus, where he's not living with this intent to glorify himself, bring power and authority to himself. It's to actually serve others, right? So this idea of love all and serve all is, again, a foundational tenet in the spiritual journey. And so, just personally speaking, I mean, growing up in America now, a child of the 70s and 80s, nearing later middle age, it's just watching how the tides have turned in our culture and seeing how whatever lifestyle had the ideas of virtue and sanctity and sacredness within them, they're eroding, right? They're eroding away. And I think one of the things that kind of prompts my messages every week here on a Sunday morning is the idea that there is this intent or this wave to keep vice coming in stronger and stronger within our culture. And so the spiritual awakening is no longer optional for us. Like it's what we said last week, it's a critical moment in our evolutionary path. Like we are in this place of really critical choice. And this is kind of like what we get in the Bhagavad Gita, right? So we have a class coming up on the Gita on Wednesday. And in the Gita, you have the two main characters, Krishna and Arjuna. And Arjuna is a warrior, and Krishna is considered to be God incarnate. But he's also a warrior within Arjuna's family. And the two of them are fighting on the side of the Pandavas. This is the army of light, of knowledge, of goodness. And on the other side of the battlefield, you have the Kauravas. These are also relatives of Arjuna, but they are representatives of the forces of darkness, of greed, of hatred, of world dominance. And what's really fascinating about the teachings within the Gita, they're set within a larger storyline of the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is one of the ancient epics of humankind. And it's the longest epic ever written. And it's giving us a view of history, or really prehistory, that is quite fascinating. So it's supposedly taking place over 5,000 years ago. And in this time, you have extraterrestrials visiting the Earth, great beings rising up into higher planets and learning the mysteries of life. You have weapons that are charged with mantric power. You have the ability to go underwater and visit the kingdoms of the Nagas or serpent beings or these magical reptilian beings. Like, all of this is kind of the norm within the Mahabharata. And so Arjuna and Krishna are, like I said, on the side of the good. But what's also at play here is that these characters, Arjuna, Krishna, and his four other brothers, Arjuna's other brothers, they're incarnations of the gods. So at the end of every age, it says in the Mahabharata, that there is this epic battle between the demons and the gods. And the gods will incarnate and the demons will incarnate. And so on this stage of history, this cosmic battle plays out. And so what you're dealing with here is that the demonic side of the scale is wanting world domination. And so Arjuna's at this point where he's looking at the appearance level and he sees only his family, his friends, his grandfathers, his uncles. He's caught within the appearances of things. And he's feeling like he cannot fight. He can't go against his family. He can't sever the ties because it would create disaster in his mind if he were to do this. And Krishna instructs him, first and foremost, not to get lost in appearances, that you're actually a divine soul. And he says to Arjuna at one point, he says, you grieve for what shouldn't be grieved for. He says, take a look around. No one here on this battlefield never not existed in the past. And there will be no time in the future where they will cease to exist. And what Krishna's doing is he's bringing Arjuna's mind to a clear insight to know that you're not a body. You're the eternal soul. And so as an eternal soul, you have choices to make. And if these choices have you severing family ties for the sake of cultivating virtue, severing friendships, severing careers, severing anything that brings vice or obstacles into your life, you owe it to yourself. It's your dharma. It's your duty to do that. You cannot involve yourself with those that keep toxicity going in your life. And so Arjuna is at a point where he thinks he's being compassionate by involving himself in these toxic relationships. He thinks that if he actually does stand up for virtue and truth and makes a break with these old patterns within his life, that somehow he's doing a disservice to his loved ones. And Krishna's saying, you're a fool if you think that. And you're also a fool, he says, if you think that anyone can die. He says, what is in reality true can never die, and what dies was never true. These are all temporary appearances. And when we don't have spiritual wisdom, we don't see through the appearances. So this gets to the important point of cultivating virtue. Virtue, and if you want to look at it through the lens of Buddhism, cultivating the paramitas, these are virtues, these are attitudes that actually resonate with the frequency of divine nature. And so when you're strengthening kindness, strengthening love, strengthening courage, strengthening compassion and joy and discernment, these begin to actually overtake your being, and they begin to clear the mirror of your mind. So you're no longer confused by appearances and politeness and manners and niceties, and you think you should do the right thing and walk on eggshells around certain people. All of that goes away Because you're anchoring into reality. And reality is no respecter of persons. Reality is the foundation of life. And if you're not choosing life, you're choosing death. And so Krishna is telling Arjuna, you have to be able to make that distinction and no longer fall prey to your lesser emotions. Okay. So a little bit from the Gita. So Arjuna gets to a point in the conversation with Krishna where he says, what is the force that binds us to selfish deeds? What power moves us, even against our will, as if forcing us? Krishna says, it is selfish desire and anger arising from the quality of passion. These are the appetites and evils which threaten a person in this life. Much like Shantideva was just saying, right? The internal enemy. Just as fire is covered by smoke and a mirror is obscured by dust, just as the embryo rests deep within the womb, higher knowledge is hidden by selfish desire. Hidden, Arjuna, by this unquenchable fire for self-satisfaction. Self-satisfaction is the inveterate enemy of the wise. So it's important to get the landscape of consciousness that's being laid out here. We as ego-centered beings, right? I am this body is a statement from the ego. I am my name. I am my story. I was born on such and such a day and I'm living this life. That is 100% ego identity. The spiritual teachings, these higher initiatic, transformational, liberation teachings, interrupt that narrative. It's like a vertical intersection that comes in your timeline at some point, maybe this morning. And it interrupts that story, this hypnotic story that we've been telling ourselves, that we believe 100%. We're totally committed to it. I am this body. And so these initiatic teachings interrupt that. And they're showing you that is not yourself. Your body identity is a temporary appearance. It's not who you are. And if you follow life thinking that you're only the body, and by satisfying the senses of the body, you'll find peace and satisfaction in your life, you're deluded according to these teachings. Does that come as a welcome to us? No. It pisses us off. Right? That was the famous saying, right? Truth shall set you free, right after it pisses you off. And this is what happens then. We come to this place of, again, choice. Do I continue as this body after I've been interrupted by this higher knowledge or this higher truth, or do I begin to follow a different path? Do I turn my face around, which is the true meaning of repentance, instead of going out into the world seeking bodily satisfaction? Do I repent? Do I turn my face around? And do I start heading towards my true self and home? And this is the tug of war, because what Krishna is telling us is your true self is hidden from your awareness by your selfish desires. That's why they're enemies. No one is doing this to us. These propensities, these impulses, these forces, these drives that are immaterial and psychological and emotional, that's where these teachings go. It's instinctual, it's visceral. That's why when you start to get these teachings, you wake up. It's visceral. You see differently. The veil comes off your mind. Light, not, electromagnetic light, but higher light floods your awareness. You can't ignore that. nor would you ever want it to go away after that. That's ananda, that's bliss. And so Krishna says, selfish desire is found in the senses, the lower mind and intellect, misleading them and burying the understanding in delusion. Fight with all your strength, Arjuna. Controlling your senses, conquer your enemy, the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. And then he says something very important for us. The senses are higher than the body, right? More subtle. The mind higher than the senses. So the mind's even more subtle than the sense faculties. Above the mind is the intellect, and above the intellect is the Atman, or the soul. Thus, knowing that which is supreme, let the Atman, let the soul, rule the ego. So what he's basically saying is, when you're not serving your higher self, your intellect, which is your choice-making faculty, and your ability to discern virtue from vice, totally clouded, totally diluted, totally lost in the me and the mine and the body identity. And so that's why a lot of the times, we've gotten these spiritual teachings maybe along the way, but we weren't in the right place. We weren't looking to wake up. And our intellect was completely asleep, completely clouded, covered up. But he's saying that when it gets to the point when you're ready to do this internal house cleaning, your intellect becomes the executive function within the house cleaning process. You actually start to have to make these choices that will then rule over all of the lower tiers of your being. Your intellect has authority over the body, it has authority over the senses, it has authority over your mind. So your choice-making power can shift all the other levels of your mind. The only choice you have, make it very clear, right? We could say it's virtue or vice. The only choice you really have is I am this body or I am the soul. If I choose I am this body, vice will be my way of living in the world. That's what will feel natural to me. If I choose I am the soul, well, I'll have to actually wrestle against my past choices, right? This is what becomes the jihad, the tug of war within the soul, within the intellect, really. Because now you have to clean house, you have to sever, you have to get rid of these habit patterns and ways of being and appetites that go against the soul. But then you're clear on the choice. My only choice is to wake up, to be the soul, or to stay asleep and be the body, right? Virtue or vice. Is this clear? Good. And then Krishna says something very helpful. So remember I had said you're not alone. Like once you make this choice, we seem to be in this, some teachings have referred to this planet as being under quarantine. We're sort of quarantined from the greater network of worlds and beings, right? We're in a vast populated cosmos with so many different levels of being, high and low. And when you're choosing to walk the path of virtue and awakening, these higher beings are definitely aware of that. And they come in with their influences. Just like if you're walking the path of vice, the lower beings are aware of that. And they come in with their influence. You're never alone in the choices you make. Right? Because we're all connected to this network, whether we know it or not. And when you make the choice to wake up and to know yourself as the soul, you're not only stirring up these higher beings, but you're stirring up or receiving the influences of what the Gita would call the Purushottama, the Supreme Self, the Lord of beings, right? In this story, he takes the form of the avatar Krishna. And so Krishna says this: those who know me as their own divine self break through the belief that they are the body and are not reborn as separate creatures. Such a one, Arjuna, is united with me, delivered from selfish attachment, fear, and anger, filled with me, surrendering themselves to me, purified in the fire of my being. Many have reached this state of unity in me, right? So that is heaven, that is nirvana, that is union with God, or yoga. And the encouragement here, because, like I had said, these are all psychological forces within us. And so, it feels maybe a little abstract when we just talk about it the way we are. But when you're alone and you're dealing with these voices and these imprints that you've had from when you were a little baby or a little child and all on up, and the experiences you've had in your relationships and the traumas and the dramas that you've experienced, like this gets real. And when sometimes we want to wake up, remember, if we've been living a certain way, and I speak from experience, not having the guidance, not having the mentorship, I was sort of set adrift from a young guy, and I just lived for my own pleasure in my teen and early 20 years, and just like pedal to the metal. And I got to see many things that showed me the underbelly of life, and it made me really see that, what I was choosing for myself, what I thought was going to bring me happiness, was actually horrible. And when I woke up to that fact, it didn't change. The problem is those impulses are still there. The drives are still there. The desires are still there. And so as you have this grace moving in your life, you also have those old voices and shadows of your past. What do you think you're doing? You can't even believe this shit. This is ridiculous. Right? So he says in the Gita, even if you were the most sinful of sinners, Arjuna, you could cross beyond all sin by the raft of spiritual wisdom. As the heat of a fire reduces wood to ashes, the fire of knowledge burns to ashes all karma. Nothing in this world purifies like spiritual wisdom. So in other words, there's no stronger power than the light of God or the spiritual wisdom. And so whenever you're confronted by your past and these voices that try to derail or weaken you or tempt you, you're still always at the choice point. You're still always able to choose the light. And when you choose the light, the darkness has to flee. It has no power over your choice. The only way it can have power is if it is your choice. Your choice overrides everything. Everything. And then finally here. So in chapter 16 of the Gita, they talk about Krishna talks about the two paths. The path of the Deva, or the divine path, and the path of the Ashura, the demonic path. And what the Gita is saying is, that's what you got. You got the divine path that leads to your true nature, and you got the demonic path that leads you into the theater of illusion. And that's why he says to Arjuna at the outset of the chapter, be fearless and pure, never waver in your determination or your dedication to the spiritual life. Give freely, be self-controlled, sincere, truthful, loving, and full of the desire to serve. Realize the truth of the scriptures, learn to be detached, and to take joy in renunciation. Do not get angry or harm any living creature, but be compassionate and gentle. Show goodwill to all. Cultivate vigor, patience, will, purity. Avoid malice and pride. Then, Arjuna, you will achieve your divine destiny. Other qualities, Arjuna, make a person more and more inhuman. This is wild stuff, right? So you're either becoming more human or more inhuman. Hypocrisy, arrogance, conceit, anger, cruelty, ignorance. The divine qualities lead to freedom, the demonic to bondage. But do not grieve, Arjuna. You were born with the divine attributes. So he's saying to Arjuna, you already have the tendency to want to wake up. You have the tendency to cultivate virtue. But this is also part of having spiritual wisdom. Not everyone that appears within the world of form has those tendencies. Krishna tells us some people have divine tendencies, others have demonic tendencies. You don't have anger and arrogance and judgment towards them, but you do have discernment, right? By their fruits you shall know them. So Krishna says, I'll describe the demonic a little bit. The demonic do things they should avoid and avoid the things they should do. They have no sense of uprightness, purity, or truth. Right? So for the demonic, war is peace. Sickness is health. Poverty is wealth. These are the principles that the demonic will live by. Right? As long as I get more, others can have less. Right? Greed. There is no God, they say, no truth, no spiritual law, no moral order. The basis of life is sex. What else can it be? Holding such distorted views, possessing scant discrimination, they become enemies of the world, causing suffering and destruction. Right? And remember, the setting of this whole teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is we're dealing with a whole army of beings that have sided with the demonic tendencies. It's the shift of the ages. This is where everything gets brought up. Like all of the ambiguity and neutrality evaporates. And you actually get to see the divine and the demonic tendencies in full manifestation through the human play. It's all surfacing. And so some would say we're at another great epical shift in our day. That's why these initiatic or esoteric teachings, like I said last week, are everywhere now. You can go on Amazon and buy all of the secret teachings. You can learn all of this for yourself because there's this great acceleration towards this epical shift where neutrality is evaporating and you're getting to see world domination from some and the will to wake up and have a beautiful society from others. We must find ourselves in this equation, right? Let's see. So there are three gates to this self-destructive hell: lust, anger, and greed. Renounce these three. Those who escape from these three gates of darkness, Arjuna, seek what is best and attain life's supreme goal. Others disregard the teachings of the scriptures. Driven by selfish desire, they miss the goal of life, miss even happiness and success. Therefore, let the inspired teachings be your guide in what to do and what not to do. Understand and then act in accordance with these higher teachings. So I guess what I'm laying out here are the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s of waking up, right? It really is the doctrine or the teaching of two paths, right? Every tradition has this. Jesus will say in the Sermon on the Mount, there is the way that is wide, and many people walk on this wide road, and that road leads to destruction and death. But the way to truth is narrow. The way to life is narrow. And he says, few find it, this narrow way. And the narrow way is really, the reason why he would say it's narrow, I think, is because you have to actually go against the senses. The senses drive our attention outside of ourselves, right? We're almost, if we're unconscious of it, we're compelled to just always identify with the five senses. And as Plato had shown us in the allegory of the cave, the five senses only see shadows. They don't see the substance. They don't see the reality. So that's the wide way. And whatever you're looking at is going to die. That's the world of death. Everything here will be destroyed. And so the narrow way is when you turn within and find the eternal or the kingdom of God within. And these forces of your lower desires and your ego drives are these internal enemies that stop you from entering that inner door, right? That place within the heart where there's the heaven or the light. And so this is, the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s to know how to navigate this invisible terrain, right? It's oftentimes packaged within myths and folklore and legend. And at one point we outgrow the stories and we think the stories are just childish and, silly and from a bygone time. But they were always designed to communicate this esoteric or higher teaching for those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, right? And what determines whether or not you're seeing or hearing is your intention, your desire, your willingness. It's that willingness that opens the door. I just don't want to feel like I'm being preachy, so kind of just relax for a moment, because that's really where we can get it for ourselves. I don't want you to feel like I'm talking at you. I'm not talking at you. I can be very passionate sometimes, and I think what eventually comes to pass is, we hear it, but on another level, we might be receiving it energetically, and I think that's what's really important, is that there's something getting stirred up within our deeper psyche, that words are just words, but hopefully the energy of the words, the intention behind the words can trigger that deeper shift. And that's what's required, this actualizing of the potential. right? And that's when we begin to wake up from being sheep and knowing that we're lions, right? So, the New Testament, something that many of us have grown up with in our culture. Some of us have good memories, some of us not so good about the teachings from the Bible. But seen within this wider scope of the liberation teaching, there's so much here that is beneficial and important to learn. St. Paul, in his letter to the Colossians, is talking about this idea of virtue and vice, right? And he's saying, if you've had this new birth, if you've had this awakening of your higher mind, then you're resurrecting. You're not in the realm of death anymore. The energies of life are now operating in your psyche. You're becoming a new creation, right? The old things are passing away. This outer surface ego person, the old man, is dying. And the new man, this higher self, is being born in your awareness. And he's saying then, if you've been undergoing this rebirth and you've been raised up with Christ, then keep seeking the things above where Christ is seated, right? These virtues that lead to your higher self. Keep thinking about things above and not things on the earth, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you too will be revealed in glory with him. So what that means is, if you're cultivating virtue, these are the qualities of the Christ mind. These are the essence. This is the essence of life that you're cultivating in your being. And so when the divine self or the Christ is revealed, you feel affinity with that. You can actually embrace that because you're resonating with it. You're in communion with it, right? You've undergone the rebirth experience. You've died to the self that is in vice, and you're reborn in the self that's in virtue. And this is kind of my theory about this whole wrath of God thing, that if you're living in vice, the same experience of the revelation of the light of God will not be pleasant and joyful. It will be wrathful, because everything that we've invested in is illusion when we're living in vice, when we're living by our selfish desires. And so when reality dawns, what is actually joy to those who are cultivating virtue, and it's heaven, is actually hell to those who have been committed to serving the lower nature, the vices. Same reality. Not that God is punishing and judging, just revealing. And the mind that is hidden in the dark and hidden in selfishness, it hurts that mind to see reality, right? So put to death, he says, whatever in your nature belongs to the earth: sexual immorality, impurity, shameful passion, evil desire, and greed, which is idolatry, right? Worshipping of the ego. Because of these things, the wrath of God is coming on the sons of disobedience. You also lived your lives in this way at one time, when you used to live among these sons of disobedience. But now, put off all such things as anger, rage, malice, slander, abusive language from your mouth. Don't lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with its practices and have been clothed with the new man that is being renewed in knowledge, according to the image of the one who created it. Now get this. This new self, this new man, as he calls him, here, in this state of mind, there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, all the distinctions of peoples in Paul's day, all right, all the races and nationalities and religions. There is none of that, but Christ is all in all. This one self is witnessed to be the only reality in the Jew and the non-Jew, in the male or the female, in the slave or the free, in the aristocrat or the guy in the street, homeless. There's one self. And when you've cultivated the virtues and allowed this new birth to be actualized in you, you're this. And you see it in everyone. This is the awakening of the Messianic age. This is the epical shift. Right? Again, don't get hung up in language. Do I have a moment or are we at time? Somebody give me the time. I can't see. It's 9. All right. You've been saved from more. Blue bag's going to go around. So what do you guys think? Any comments, questions, ideas? Good, I'm glad to hear that. Blessing the offering, intending that whatever form this energy may take, may it be used to bring true wisdom and true happiness to all beings. And so it is. All right, my friends, we can rise and seal the deal. Resting within the heart and feeling the sacred space within. And recognizing that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Have a beautiful Sunday. Happy Father's Day once again. Enjoy your day.